structural leverage compounds quietly. The CUSMA review reaches its July 1st deadline without a comprehensive agreement. The relationship settles into a new equilibrium that is structurally lower than the previous 60 years, and structurally fragile in a way Washington does not yet understand. The diagnostic infrastructure of American medicine continues to function every day on the assumption that nothing on the Canadian side ever goes wrong, that nothing ever gets contested, that nothing ever requires Ottawa to make a political decision about what gets shipped, where it gets shipped, and when. That assumption holds, until it does not. Scenario 3, probability 25%. Rupture. The trade war escalates further. Trump activates the 100% tariff on Canadian electricity that he has publicly threatened. Canada does not stop isotope shipments. Canada does not need to. The supply chain simply becomes structurally more difficult through ordinary regulatory friction. Customs delays at the Buffalo crossing, cold chain documentation requirements, air freight inspection windows, each one minor by itself, each one adding hours to a 6-day operational cycle for an isotope with a 66-hour half-life. Within weeks, American radiopharmacies begin reporting isolated supply gaps. Within a month, individual hospital systems begin postponing diagnostic scans, and the story does not break on the front page of the trade section. It breaks on the front page of the health section. A patient profile in the Boston Globe, a cancer ward in Houston that ran out of generators, a pediatric hospital in Pittsburgh forced to reschedule renal scans for 3 days. For the first time in 14 months, the political pressure inside the United States does not come from American businesses whose products are slightly more expensive. It comes from American voters whose doctors cannot get them a diagnostic test. And every single one of those voters, when they ask why, will hear the same answer. The supply comes from Canada. Canada has not done anything wrong. Canada has continued to ship every dose Washington ordered. The disruption is on the American side, and the political conversation about the trade war shifts completely. It is no longer just a conversation about tariffs. It becomes a conversation about whether the United States can run its own healthcare system without the country it has spent 14 months insulting. 3 paths, 40,000 scans a day. 1 Ontario reactor coming online in 2026, 3 more Canadian production sites already operating, and a White House that has not yet realized which negotiation it is actually in. Donald Trump tariffed Canadian steel. He forgot Canadian reactors run 40,000 American cancer scans every day. He forgot that the country he was insulting on a live stage in Washington had spent the previous 7 years rebuilding the most critical piece of medical infrastructure in North American healthcare. He forgot that the cancer ward of every American hospital every weekday morning requires a 6-day-old shipment of an isotope Washington cannot produce. He forgot that geography determines water leverage on the Columbia River, and nuclear infrastructure determines medical leverage in cancer diagnostics. And you cannot tariff your way out of either. Mark Carney did not respond to Howard Lutnick by mentioning Darlington. He did not need to. The structural fact of Darlington is not a threat. It is a description. Washington spent 14 months trying to dictate the terms of a negotiation in which it had already lost the most consequential piece of leverage on the table. And it had not yet noticed that it was missing. The country that walked into that negotiation believing it was the dominant party had, in fact, spent the previous decade quietly losing the one form of leverage no executive order can recover. And the country that walked into that negotiation as the supposed weaker party had, in fact, spent the previous decade quietly building the one form of leverage no tariff can replace. 40,000 scans a day, 1 Ontario reactor, 1 Canadian Prime Minister, and a United States that depends every single morning on the country it has been negotiating against. The decisions are being made. Keep watching. Stay alert. And remember this. The next time a politician talks about pressure, leverage, or strength, look past the speech. Look at the supply chain. Because power is not always the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes power is a radioactive shipment moving quietly through an airport before sunrise, on a schedule no country can afford to break. Sit with that for a moment. The country that spent 14 months trying to bully Canada into trade concessions is the same country that depends every hour of every day on Canadian medical infrastructure for cancer diagnostics. 40,000 scans a day, 40 million procedures a year, each one traceable in the end back to a foreign reactor. And starting in 2026, increasingly traceable back to one specific reactor in one specific town in the province of Ontario. Now look beyond molybdenum-99, because the picture is bigger than one isotope and one reactor. Bruce Power in Tiverton, Ontario became the first commercial nuclear power station in the world to produce lutetium-177 commercially in 2022. Lutetium-177 is one of the most important advanced cancer therapy isotopes ever developed. It is the active ingredient in targeted radionuclide therapy for advanced prostate cancer that has not responded to hormone therapy or chemotherapy. It is also being deployed for neuroendocrine tumors, and the clinical trial pipeline behind lutetium-177 is one of the largest in modern oncology. Bruce Power produces it. Bruce Power exports it, and the treatment infrastructure of American oncology depends on it. McMaster University in Hamilton operates the most powerful research reactor in Canada and the only major neutron source in the country. McMaster is the world's leading supplier of holmium-166 and iodine-125. Iodine-125 is used in brachytherapy seed implants for prostate cancer treatment and in research applications across hundreds of American academic medical centers. Holmium-166 is used in liver tumor therapy. The university produces these isotopes for clinical and research markets, and the majority of its customers by volume are inside the United States. Pickering Nuclear Generating Station, Bruce Nuclear Generating Station, and Darlington Nuclear Generating Station are all in Ontario. All are CANDU reactors. All are commercial. Together, they produce cobalt-60, used in cancer radiation treatment, medical device sterilization, and food safety. Approximately 40% of the world's cobalt-60 supply comes from Canadian commercial reactors. The first cancer treatment using cobalt-60 in human history was performed at Victoria Hospital in London, Ontario in 1951. Canada has been at the center of nuclear medicine for 74 years. Then there is Nordion, a private Canadian company headquartered in Ottawa that supplies the majority of the iodine-131 and xenon-133 used in the United States. Iodine-131 is used to diagnose and treat thyroid cancer, hyperthyroidism, and certain rare endocrine conditions. Xenon-133 is used to diagnose lung function disorders, including pulmonary embolism. Nordion ships those isotopes to American hospitals every week on commercial flights or specialized cold chain transport. The supply line runs through Toronto Pearson Airport, through Buffalo, through Detroit, then into the medical distribution networks operated by Cardinal Health, GE Healthcare, Triad Isotopes, and the United Pharmacy Partners Network. Every major American radiopharmacy chain depends on those Canadian shipments arriving exactly on schedule every week without delay. 5 different categories of medical isotopes, multiple Canadian production sites, one country supplying the diagnostic and therapeutic backbone of American oncology, cardiology, neurology, and emergency medicine. And Washington has spent 14 months publicly attacking that country's economy, insulting its prime minister, and canceling its treaties, while also requiring that country's medical infrastructure to keep delivering the most time-sensitive radioactive shipments in the global pharmaceutical supply chain. Howard Lutnick called Mark Carney nuts on Tuesday. At that exact moment, Mark Carney was the political leader of the country, supplying the backbone of the radio tracers used in American hospital diagnostics. There is no negotiation textbook in the world that explains why anyone would publicly insult the head of government of a country that controls your medical isotope supply. Unless, of course, you have not noticed that they do. And that is exactly the position the Trump administration has been operating from. Because if you read the public statements from the United States Trade Representative's Office, the Commerce Department, the White House Council of Economic Advisors, and the National Security Council, you will not find a single mention of medical isotopes. You will not find Darlington, you will not find Bruce Power, you will not find McMaster, you will not find Nordion. The single most concentrated piece of structural leverage Canada has acquired in the entire trade war is treated on the American side as if it does not exist. Until very recently, in September of 2025, the United States Department of Energy's National Nuclear Security Administration announced $32 million in funding to Shine Technologies, a Wisconsin company, to complete construction of an American molybdenum-99 production facility in Janesville. The facility was approximately 75% complete. The same announcement included a proposed Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services rule providing a $10 add-on payment for radiopharmaceuticals derived from domestically produced molybdenum-99 beginning January 1st, 2026. The official statement from the National Nuclear Security Administration acknowledged the urgency by referencing the 2024 event, in which 2 overseas production reactors were simultaneously shut down. One scheduled, one unscheduled. That simultaneous shutdown resulted in the major global shortage already described, with significant impacts across the United States. Translation. Washington has known quietly for at least a year that its medical isotope supply chain is structurally indefensible. And Washington has been racing quietly to build domestic production. But that production is not online. It will not be online in 2026. It will be online, optimistically, in 2027 or later, and only at a fraction of the volume needed to replace foreign supply. That means for the entire CUSMA review period, for the entire next 18 months, the United States will continue to import every dose of its most critical diagnostic isotope from foreign reactors. Increasingly, from one specific Ontario reactor owned by an Ontario provincial corporation, operating inside a country whose Prime Minister Howard Lutnick called nuts on a live stage in Washington in front of 200 global investors. That is what leverage looks like when it is not announced. It just exists. And that brings us to the domino sequence. This sequence has been building for weeks. Lumber was domino 1, dairy was domino 2, Alberta was domino 3, alcohol was domino 4, tourism was domino 5. Howard Lutnick calling Carney nuts was domino 6. The 5 rejected demands from Trade Representative Greer was domino 7. The Columbia River Treaty cancellation was domino 8. And the structural North American supplier role Canada is about to reclaim through Darlington, Bruce Power, McMaster, and Nordion is domino 9. Every previous domino was about one sector, one product, one negotiation. This domino is different. This one is about every hospital, every cancer ward, every cardiology clinic, every emergency room, every radiology department, every nuclear medicine technician in the United States. Every one of them. Every day, depending on Canadian reactors. Every one of them. Every day. Dependent on a supply chain that Ottawa controls and Washington cannot replicate on a relevant timeline. Lumber, dairy, alcohol, and tourism were trade disputes about economic preferences. The medical isotope dependency is something else entirely. It is a question of whether American patients receive the diagnostic care their doctors ordered on the day their doctors ordered it. And today, the answer to that question runs through Ontario. Now, there are 3 possible paths over the next 12 months. Keep them tight, keep them honest. Scenario 1, probability 25%. The structural fact is acknowledged. Washington quietly recalibrates. The most aggressive Canada-facing rhetoric from the Commerce Department, the Treasury, and the White House gets dialed down. Public insults stop. Specific concessions are not made, but the temperature of the negotiation drops. The medical isotope supply chain continues to operate without disruption. Canada does not weaponize it because Canada does not need to. The dependency itself, once visible, becomes its own pressure. The CUSMA review reaches its July 1st deadline with a quiet extension agreement. Tariffs on autos, steel, and aluminum are adjusted downward. The relationship stabilizes. This is the optimistic path. The probability is only 25% because nothing in the public posture of the Trump administration over the past 3 weeks suggests the institutional capacity to recognize this kind of dependency without being forced to. But it remains possible. Recognition can come quickly when the right person briefs the right principle. Scenario 2, probability 50%. The most likely outcome, nothing changes publicly. The supply chain keeps operating. Canada makes no explicit threat. Washington does not acknowledge the dependency. The trade war keeps escalating along its current trajectory. Steel, aluminum, autos, dairy, lumber. And every day in the background, 40,000 American cancer scans continue to run on Canadian isotopes. 40,000. That is the number of medical scans performed every single day in the United States that depend on one radioactive isotope. 40,000 cardiac stress tests, 40,000 bone scans for suspected cancer metastases, 40,000 kidney function studies, 40,000 brain scans, lung perfusion studies, thyroid imaging exams, sentinel lymph node biopsies for breast cancer staging. Every one of them, every single day, depends on molybdenum-99. And the United States has not produced a single gram of molybdenum-99 on its own soil since the late 1980s. For 7 years, between 2018 and 2025, every American hospital received its entire supply of this isotope from research reactors in the Netherlands, Belgium, South Africa, and Australia. Hospitals got it from those countries because Canada's National Research Universal Reactor, the facility that had supplied roughly 40% of the world's molybdenum-99 for decades, was permanently shut down in March of 2018. From that moment forward, the diagnostic backbone of American medicine was sitting on top of a transatlantic supply chain. And nobody in Washington had to think about it until they did. Then, in May of 2025, while Donald Trump was putting tariffs on Canadian steel, threatening Canadian electricity, demanding its Canadian concessions on dairy, lumber, and digital services, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission quietly approved something Washington had not noticed. The Darlington Nuclear Generating Station in Clarington, Ontario, became the first commercial nuclear power plant in the world licensed to produce molybdenum-99. And in 2026, when full commercial production begins, Canada will once again become the dominant North American supplier of the most critical isotope in nuclear medicine. Trump tariffed Canadian steel. He forgot Canadian reactors help run 40,000 American cancer scans every day. This matters more than any tariff fight Washington has staged over the last 14 months. Because tariffs hit consumer goods. Tariffs hit construction lumber. Tariffs hit dairy farmers, bourbon distillers, and auto plants. But this does not hit consumer goods. This hits the medical infrastructure of the United States at the deepest possible level. And it hits in a way that cannot be replaced by an executive order, a tariff threat, a Federal Reserve intervention, or a procurement reform in any reasonable time frame. Molybdenum-99 is not a luxury. It is not optional. It is the parent isotope from which technetium-99m is generated. And technetium-99m is the radiotracer used in approximately 82% of all diagnostic nuclear medicine procedures performed in the developed world. 82%. Every doctor listening to this already knows what that means. Every nurse knows. Every medical technologist knows. If a patient walks into an emergency room with chest pain at 3 in the morning, and the doctor needs to know whether that patient is having a heart attack or suffering from severe anxiety, the test is a technetium-99m perfusion scan. If a patient walks into a clinic with unexplained bone pain that has been getting worse for 2 months, and the doctor needs to know whether the cancer treated 3 years earlier has metastasized to the spine, the test is a technetium-99m bone scan. If a patient is being staged for breast cancer surgery and the surgeon needs to know exactly which lymph node to biopsy, the procedure uses technetium-99m. If a child arrives at a pediatric hospital with a suspected kidney malformation, the test is a technetium-99m renal scan. Every single one of those tests, every single time, requires molybdenum-99 to have been produced inside a nuclear reactor somewhere in the world within the previous 6 days. 6 days. That is the operational shipping cycle. The actual half-life of molybdenum-99 is 66 hours. The half-life of its decay product, technetium-99m, is 6 hours. 6 hours. That means the radiotracer used in the cardiac stress test someone might have tomorrow morning was generated less than 24 hours earlier from a molybdenum-99 sample that, less than 7 days before that, was a fission product inside a nuclear reactor on another continent. Molybdenum-99 cannot be stockpiled. It cannot be warehoused. It cannot be placed in a strategic reserve by the Department of Defense in case of a trade war. The supply chain has to run continuously, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It runs on precise air freight schedules, cold chain logistics, customs documentation, regulatory inspections, and radiopharmaceutical compounding at every node of the network. Or it does not run at all, and if it does not run for even 1 week, hospitals across the United States start canceling cancer scans, postponing cardiac diagnostics, delaying surgical decisions, and rescheduling procedures for tens of thousands of patients per day. That is the structural reality Howard Lutnick was negotiating against when he called Mark Carney nuts on the semaphore stage. That is the structural reality Jameson Greer was negotiating against when he presented his 5 rejected demands to Congress. That is the structural reality the Trump administration was negotiating against when it canceled the Columbia River Treaty in July of last year. None of those negotiations happened in a vacuum. All of them happened while a hospital system was already importing every dose of its most critical diagnostic isotope from across an ocean. And there is a real-world test of what happens when that supply chain breaks. In 2024, 2 of the major foreign reactors that supply molybdenum-99 to North America went offline at the same time. One was a scheduled maintenance shutdown. One was unplanned. The overlap was short by historical standards. But the official statement issued by the United States Department of Energy's National Nuclear Security Administration in September of 2025 described what happened next in plain language. It said the simultaneous outage resulted in a major global shortage of molybdenum-99, with significant impacts across the United States. Translation: American hospitals ran short, scans were postponed, cancer staging procedures were delayed. The exact diagnostic decisions that determine whether a tumor gets treated this week or next month were quietly pushed back in radiology departments across 40 states because 2 reactors on another continent had problems with their cooling systems. The 2024 event was the warning. It was Washington staring at its own diagnostic infrastructure and realizing that the foundation of American oncology and cardiology was sitting on a supply chain it did not control. And this is where a long-running structural dependency turns into the sharpest single piece of leverage Canada has acquired in the entire trade war: Darlington. To understand it, you have to walk through what happened in Ontario in 2025, because the timeline matters. In April of 2024, Ontario Power Generation subsidiary Laurentis Energy Partners, working with BWXT Medical, announced that they had completed installation and initial commissioning of a proprietary target delivery system at the Darlington Nuclear Generating Station, the first system of its kind anywhere in the world. It was designed to insert natural molybdenum targets directly into a CANDU reactor while that reactor is still operating at full power, while it is still generating electricity for the Ontario grid. Without interrupting power production, without shutting the reactor down, the targets are irradiated for a precise interval, harvested while the reactor keeps running, and then shipped immediately to BWXT's medical processing facility in Peterborough. There, they are converted into the molybdenum-99 used in technetium-99M generators distributed to American radiopharmacies. This is not a research reactor. This is not a small, specialized facility. This is one of the largest commercial nuclear power generating stations on the continent. 4 CANDU reactors, roughly 20% of Ontario's electricity. And now, at the same time, the same physical infrastructure is also producing the most critical medical isotope in nuclear medicine through a target delivery technology that does not exist anywhere else. In May of 2025, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission issued the formal license amendment authorizing Darlington's Unit 2 to produce molybdenum-99 commercially. That same regulatory decision also authorized production of lutetium-177 and yttrium-90. Lutetium-177 is the targeted radionuclide used in advanced cancer therapies for prostate cancer and neuroendocrine tumors. Yttrium-90 is the isotope packaged into Boston Scientific's TheraSphere glass microspheres, distributed to more than 30 countries and used to treat liver cancer. The timeline matters because it lines up almost perfectly with the trade war. The trade war started escalating in early 2025. Canada redirected lumber to Europe in February. The dairy supply management vote was codified in March. Alberta's separatist delegation went to Washington in April. And in May, while Washington was still publicly trying to dictate Canadian terms, the regulatory decision authorizing Canada to become the structural North American supplier of 3 of the most critical isotopes in nuclear medicine was made quietly in Ottawa. No White House response, because there was no White House response possible. Because the United States cannot produce these isotopes domestically and has not been able to for almost 40 years.